1943. While the rest of the world was fighting a war of steel, tanks, and bullets, a secret wing of the Third Reich was fighting a war of shadows. Imagine for a moment the freezing winds of the Harz Mountains. Deep in the Quedlinburg Abbey, behind 3 layers of elite SS guards armed with experimental weaponry, a group of women sat in a perfect, silent circle. They weren't nurses, they weren't secretaries, they weren't the German mothers promoted by Goebbels' propaganda. According to declassified Allied intelligence reports gathered in the closing months of the war, these women were identified by a single, terrifying title: the Hexen, the Witches. They were the centerpiece of a multi-million-dollar project ordered by Heinrich Himmler himself. This wasn't a hobby or a side project. It was a desperate search for a weapon that didn't belong to this century or this world. While Einstein was working on the physics of the atom, Himmler's witch unit was working on the physics of the soul. For decades, the history books told us a simplified story. They said the Nazis were obsessed with land, living space, and political power. But as the crates of captured documents were unsealed in the 1980s and 90s, a darker, more jagged truth began to emerge. The Hexen files tell a story that makes the standard history of WWII look like a sanitized fairy tale. They tell of rituals conducted on the frozen eve of Operation Barbarossa, where officers spilled blood on ancient rune stones to freeze the hearts of Russian soldiers. They tell of haunted sites across the occupied territories of Poland and Ukraine, forests where battle-hardened German panzer crews refused to spend the night because the shadows didn't just move, they started to scream in the voices of the dead. And at the heart of it all was the H. Sonderauftrag, the H Special Unit. This was a dedicated division of the SS whose only objective was to scour the continent, raiding libraries and desecrating graves to collect the physical remains, the bones and hair of medieval witches. Their destination? Wewelsburg Castle, a triangular fortress designed to be the center of the new world. But here is the part the historians can't or won't explain. In early 1945, as the American 3rd Armored Division closed in on these occult hubs, the files, they simply vanished. Not burned into ash, not shredded. According to the first scouts who breached the inner sanctums, the rooms were eerie. Candles were still burning, their wax pooling on the floor. Half-eaten meals sat on tables. The dust on the floor hadn't been disturbed in years, yet the air was thick with the smell of ozone and fresh herbs. It was as if every person inside had simply stepped out of time. Why was Heinrich Himmler, the second most powerful man in Germany, convinced that he was the literal reincarnation of King Heinrich the Fowler, a 10th-century Saxon monarch? Why did an entire battalion of the 7th Panzer Division in the Black Forest report being systematically picked off by something that wasn't made of flesh and didn't show up on infrared? And what is buried 3 levels beneath the Wewelsburg North Tower that makes modern-day museum guides feel physically ill, nauseous, and lightheaded the moment they cross the threshold? Today, we are opening the vault. We are peeling back the layers of Operation Paperclip and the Strasbourg intelligence maps. We are going beyond the maps and the casualty counts, into the Nazi witch files, the supernatural mysteries of WWII that the various world governments tried to bury for 80 years to maintain our rational reality. Hold on tight, because once you see the H-Unit files and understand the true nature of the SS research, you can never unsee the world the same way. The H Special Unit, Himmler's occult army. To truly grasp the insanity and the scale of the witch files, you have to look at the man who signed the checks, Heinrich Himmler. To the public, he was the Reichsführer SS, the cold, spectacles-wearing bureaucrat who managed the machinery of death. But behind closed doors, he was a man lost in a labyrinth of mysticism. Himmler didn't just believe in the supernatural, he believed it was a lost science. He was convinced that the women burned during the great witch hunts of the 16th and 17th centuries were actually the keepers of a primordial Germanic wisdom, a cosmic power that the Catholic Church had tried to extinguish. In 1935, while the rest of the German military was secretly designing the Messerschmitt fighters, Himmler was founding the H Sonderauftrag, the H Special Task Force. The H stood for Hexen, the German word for witches. He didn't hire soldiers for this unit. He hired pale-faced historians, obsessive genealogists, and self-proclaimed seers. Their mission was massive, to scan every single archive, church record, and court transcript in Europe. They spent millions of Reichsmarks creating a massive card index, the Hexenkartei. It contained detailed records of over 33,000 victims of the medieval witch trials. But they weren't interested in the tragedy of the victims. They were looking for something much more specific. They were looking for lineage. Himmler was a firm believer in blood memory. He believed that the psychic abilities of the ancient witches, the ability to influence weather, to see across distances, to kill with a thought, were genetic. He believed that if he could track down the living descendants of these witches, he could reactivate their dormant powers through ritual and trauma. Think about the sheer scale of this. While the world was on the brink of total war, the SS was running a genealogical search for magical DNA. The budget for the H unit was at one point larger than the development budget for the Tiger I tank. This wasn't a fringe hobby. It was a state-sponsored search for a supernatural superweapon.
We know this because of the transcripts recovered from the Quedlinburg trials. One lead researcher, Friedrich Hilscher, a man so strange even other SS officers feared him, wrote a chilling entry in his private journal. The experiment on March 14th was a success. We have found the frequency. The bones of the 1612 subject respond to the low vibration chanting. The air in the chamber becomes thick, like walking through water. The general is pleased. He says he can hear the voices of the ancestors coming through the stone. What frequency were they using? What were they trying to wake up in those damp stone chambers? The mystery deepens when you look at the specific locations designated as haunted sites or energy hubs by the H unit. They didn't care about high ground or supply lines. They were looking for ley lines, what they called the veins of the earth. One of their primary sites was the Externstein, a massive, jagged rock formation in the Teutoburg forest. To the average person, it's a beautiful natural landmark. To the H unit, it was an antenna. German soldiers stationed there to guard researchers reported what we would today call sensory anomalies. Their radios wouldn't pick up Berlin. They would pick up voices whispering in Old High German or languages that hadn't been spoken in 2 millennia. Men would go to sleep in their barracks and wake up 5 miles away, barefoot in the freezing forest, with no memory of the journey, but with their fingernails worn down to the quick, as if they had been clawing at the trees. The witch files contain increasingly desperate reports as the year 1944 dragged on. SS officers were attempting to commune with the spirits of the rocks to predict the outcome of the Battle of the Bulge. They turned to the world ice theory, the bizarre belief that the Earth's history was a cycle of cosmic ice moons crashing into the planet, and that a race of god-men lived in suspended animation inside the mountains. But then, the tone of the files changes. The excitement turns to raw, unadulterated fear. In late 1944, a memo was hand-delivered from the H Unit headquarters to Himmler's personal office. It contained no data, no progress report. It was a single, trembling sentence. "We have opened a door that does not have a handle on our side." Within 48 hours of that memo being received, the H Unit was ordered to be purged. Every researcher, every psychic, every secretary was stripped of their rank and sent to the most brutal parts of the Eastern Front. They weren't being reassigned to help the war effort. They were being sent to die so they could never speak of what they had seen on the other side of that door.
The haunting of the Black Forest and the ghost tank.
As the Allied juggernaut finally crossed the borders into the German heartland, they expected to find a broken army. They expected landmines, snipers, and desperate teenagers in oversized uniforms. What they didn't expect was to walk into a geography of nightmares. This isn't just folklore or soldiers' tall tales. These are official after-action reports, AARs, from American and British units that were filed, stamped restricted, and then promptly buried under the label of combat fatigue or shell shock. One of the most terrifying and documented accounts comes from the Hürtgen Forest, a place the American GIs began to call the Death Factory. But it wasn't just the artillery that was killing them. In the winter of 1944, men from the 4th Infantry Division began reporting the Greys. These weren't German soldiers in field gray uniforms. These were tall, spindly figures that moved between the trees with a fluidity that defied human biology. Scouts reported firing entire clips from their M1 Garands at these figures at point-blank range, only for the bullets to pass through them like stones through a fog. But the Greys were only the beginning. Then came the reports of the Phantom Tiger. A German Tiger tank is a terrifying machine, 60 tons of steel and a deadly 88mm gun. But the Phantom Tiger of the Black Forest was different. American patrols described a tank that would emerge from a solid wall of rock or a dense thicket where no vehicle could possibly fit. It would fire a single, devastating shot that smelled not of gunpowder, but of sulfur and ozone. When the Americans would charge the position to flank it, the tank would simply dissolve. No tracks in the mud, no crushed saplings, just the lingering sound of a low, rhythmic humming that made the soldiers' teeth ache. At first, Allied High Command dismissed this. They thought it was a German psyop, a clever use of smoke and mirrors to break the morale of tired men. But then, a unit of the 9th Infantry stumbled upon something that shattered the trickery theory. Deep in a ravine, they found a small, unmarked concrete door built into the side of a nameless hill. There were no vents, no chimneys, no signs of life. Inside, they didn't find a bunker full of soldiers. They found a sterile, white-tiled room filled with thousands of human teeth.
In the center of that room sat a single, massive radio transmitter, vibrating with a frequency so high it was almost silent. The moment the American patrol entered, 3 men collapsed with instant, massive nosebleeds. One sergeant reported that his thoughts felt like they were being scraped with a wire brush. What were the Nazis doing with tens of thousands of teeth? Modern occult researchers and fringe scientists suggest a horrifying theory: biological antennas. The H Unit believed that human remains, specifically teeth and bone, could act as a bridge to the aether, the unseen dimension between worlds. They weren't just broadcasting radio waves, they were broadcasting panic terror. They were trying to weaponize the very fabric of the human psyche, using the witch files research to create a literal hell on earth for the invading forces. This brings us back to the crown jewel of Himmler's madness, Wewelsburg Castle. When the U.S. Army finally reached the castle in April 1945, they found that the SS had tried to blow it up. But the massive stone walls refused to fall. Inside the North Tower, the Americans discovered the Obergruppenführersaal, the Hall of the Supreme Leaders. On the floor was the Black Sun, Schwarze Sonne mosaic, a symbol that had no historical precedent before the Nazis. Below it lay the crypt. The American soldiers who entered the crypt reported a phenomenon that remains unexplained by physics to this day. Even though it was a mild spring day outside and the castle had no electricity or refrigeration, the temperature in the crypt was a constant, bone-chilling -5 degrees Celsius. They found 12 stone pedestals arranged in a circle. On each pedestal was a silver ring engraved with runes. But the most haunting find was a stack of files labeled Vril Project Exfiltration. These documents detailed experiments with mediums, women like the mysterious Maria Orsic, who claimed they could remote view not just Allied movements, but other star systems. Maria Orsic vanished in March 1945. Her final internal memo to the Vril Society was only 3 words: Niemand bleibt hier. No one stays here. Did she mean the castle? Or did she mean this dimension entirely? As the Allied forces searched for the top 500 officers of the H Unit, they realized something terrifying. Over 60% of them had vanished without a trace. No bodies in the ruins of Berlin, no sightings in South America. They didn't just run away, they were erased from the physical record. The witch files suggest that the SS believed they had successfully opened a gate of return, a way to exit this world and wait in the aether until the time was right to return. The unexplained legacy. Are the portals still open? You might be asking yourself, this is 80 years ago. Why does this matter now? It matters because the witch files were never fully recovered by the public. When the war ended, the Great Silence began. In 1945, the United States launched Operation Paperclip. We are taught about the rocket scientists like Wernher von Braun who put us on the moon, but we are almost never told about the black wing of Paperclip, the relocation of Nazi psychologists, parapsychologists, and etheric researchers to underground labs in New Mexico and Virginia. If you look at the early CIA documents for Project MKUltra and Project Stargate, the military's remote viewing program, the fingerprints of the H Unit are everywhere. The frequencies used in silent sound spread spectrum technology bear a striking resemblance to the witch frequency discovered in the Quedlinburg Abbey. The search for psychic weapons didn't end with the fall of the Third Reich, it just traded its SS runes for top-secret government stamps. And then there are the sites themselves. Places like Wewelsburg, the Externsteine, and the Black Forest remain hotspots for what researchers call residual anomalies. To this day, local hikers in the Teutoburg Forest report time slips. People claim to have walked around a bend in the trail and seen a 1944 German patrol, solid, breathing, and looking just as confused as the hikers, only for the soldiers to vanish into a shimmering haze when approached. Compass malfunctions are so common in these H-unit zones that pilots are warned to rely on GPS rather than magnetic north. The Nazi witch files serve as a grim reminder that World War II was more than a battle of political ideologies. It was a clash of fundamental realities. On one side, the Allied pursuit of technology, democracy, and tangible progress. On the other, a dark, desperate obsession with ancient blood, forgotten gods, and the terrifying belief that human life was merely fuel for a ritual to tear a hole in the sky. The Nazis never explained their witch files because in their twisted logic, the war was never meant to be won on the battlefield. It was a ritual, and a ritual doesn't end just because the priest is gone. So we ask you, was the H-Unit just a collection of delusional men with too much power and a madness fueled by defeat? Or did they actually tap into a frequency that science is only now beginning to rediscover? If the SS opened a door in 1945 that had no handle on our side, who or what is currently walking through it? And more importantly, are they already among us? If you want to see the actual scanned photos of the H-Unit cards and the maps of the haunted forests we recovered from the archives, click the video on your screen right now. Don't forget to subscribe.